Hi everyone, my name is Danielle Oregon, and for my final project, I'm going to be discussing the theories of Carl Jung. Being that you already read the chapter, you should be familiar with the concepts that I bring up, but I aim to take this one step further. We should start off by discussing the background of this individual so that we get a better idea of where his arguments stemmed from. Carl Jung was a psychologist that developed analytic psychology somewhat as a response to Sigmund Freud's work. His childhood was lonely, and from a very early age, he began to observe the behaviors of his parents. This correspondingly fed into his argument that we seek partners based on characteristics and traits that were unfulfilled by our parents. For example, if my parents were mean and disrespectful, I would be in search of a partner who is nice and very respectful of my thoughts and beliefs. He is also worldwide known because of his concepts of introverted and extroverted personality. It is very important to be able to distinguish between the two. An introvert is someone who tends to be on the shyer side and does what they can to avoid social situations. On the other hand, an extroverted person is someone who seeks to meet new people, is outgoing, and enjoys being in a group where there are a lot of people and new faces. His research was somewhat built upon the works of Freud. His findings confirmed that of Freud's. But who is this Freud? Sigmund Freud was the founder of psychoanalysis. He is known for his theory of motivation, the subconscious, and mental illness. Collaboration lasted for approximately 5 years. But due to slight differences in their viewpoint, their collaboration unfortunately ended. Specifically, Jung argued with Freud about the sexual basis of neurosis. Now that we have an idea of where his thoughts originated from, let's take a look at his accomplishments. The first accomplishment that he is known for is his differentiation between introverted and extroverted personality types. He then differentiated the 4 functions of the mind, which are thinking, feeling, intuition, and sensation. As a boy, Jung had powerful dreams and fantasies that kind of developed with unusual intensities. After some time had passed, he developed a theory that stated that these strange experiences stem from an area of our mind known as the collective unconscious, and this collective unconscious was shared by everyone. Jung devoted the rest of his life to developing his theories and ideas, especially the ones between religion and psychology. He was very interested in religion and hoped to create connections between the realm of psychology and the spiritual world. He emphasized that Christianity is part of a historic process that is necessary for our consciousness. More specifically, Jung was really impressed and intrigued that symbols pop up in our fantasies and dreams, and he decided to look into why this happens. He had also hoped to brighten the lives of the elderly and help them connect with a spiritual belief to kind of brighten their day and help find purpose on this planet. He stated that if they can discover their own myth as popped up in their dreams, they would have more complete personalities. This process was known as individuation. Essentially, his analysis is a psychotherapeutic approach to analytical psychology. An analyst and a patient work together to try to bring up the unconscious characteristics of their personality and help it balance with your conscious personality traits to become a more stable and well-rounded person. This effort aims to find meaning in a person's personality, and kind of help a personality grow as you age. Now that we understand the basis of his theory, it's time to dive deeper into how marriage is seen as a psychological relationship between 2 individuals. Legally, marriage is a union between 2 individuals, but in my eyes, marriage is so much more and has so much more meaning. Being married to someone means that you truly trust and respect each other and that you see one another in your future. It also means that you hope to settle down and maybe grow a family in the near future or in a few years. We see Carl Jung's thoughts on marriage in his essay that he wrote in 1925 called Marriage as a Psychological Relationship. But what exactly does he mean by this? As a whole, the essay aims to highlight that marriage is a complex structure that has both subjective and objective factors. I think that it is very important to go over some sections of the essay so that we can fully comprehend what he's trying to say. Reading this essay as a whole will allow us to get an overall picture of what he's trying to entail, but diving deeper section by section will allow us to get the small details and little thoughts that he's putting into his work. So before we go ahead and dive deeper into the real meaning of his essay, it's important that we all have the same understanding of some terms that he brings up. So unconsciousness is something that we are not really aware of. Unconscious drives stem from either a tie from our parents or from the collective unconscious that we all share. The collective unconscious is one identity that Carl Jung says that we each have the same. Our unconscious ties to our parents play a role in maybe a partner that we're choosing in the long run. However, our consciousness is the awareness of ourselves and our surroundings. We constantly complete an assignment. We consciously speak to somebody else. We consciously make a decision. But our unconscious motives, they are more evident in our second half of life, which is when Carl Jung describes we have a better understanding of ourselves and our fate. In our second half of life, we begin to distinguish between our wants and now our responsibilities. In the second half of life, we have more responsibilities, whether it's caring for our children, our husband or wife, and cleaning for a house and paying your bills, which is not something that we really had to worry about when we were younger. Carl Jung distinguishes the transition from early life to the second part of life by recognizing our fate and also by recognizing how our unconscious motives play a role in the decisions that we make today. He also talks about something called individuation. This is a process where someone is able to develop their consciousness. Basically, an unformed and immature person develops into a more mature and better formed person, more unique. It's important to talk about what all of this means. So the essay first opens up by regarding marriage as a psychological relationship, but then it also goes on to claim that the social nature of the relationship influences the relationship between the partners. The essay then goes on to discuss the unconscious aspects of the relationship. Jung also explains that there are motives that come from the parental influence. Unconsciously, though, I think that it is the strength of the bond to the parents that influences the choices of a husband or a wife, which is further reinforced by Jung. Unconsciously, we look for everything to compensate for the lives of our parents, the ambitions that they couldn't fulfill. That's unconsciously passed down to the children. The start of the essay also then goes on to discuss that people have an incomplete understanding of themselves and those that they are surrounded by. He claims that we over-exaggerate our capabilities of our consciousness and we sort of underestimate the power of our unconscious. We don't realize how much power it holds when making everyday decisions. We may not realize it, but our unconscious pushes us to make certain decisions, whether it's being with someone specific or a decision just solely based on instinct, whether we like it or not. Our conscious love for our parents allows us to favor a choice of a partner, but our unconscious love for them makes the choice more challenging because we are seeking out characteristics that fulfill us so that we can sustain a long relationship. Given the scenario that a marriage is not arranged, our instincts for our partners stem from the unconscious. He also thinks that an active and healthy sex life deepens a relationship by providing us with a feeling of unity, which I completely agree with. When you're being intimate with someone, you're basically giving them your all. It's different than having very deep conversations with either a friend that's a girl or a friend that's a guy that you solely have a friendship with. But when you're in a relationship and you're having intimate moments, it's completely different. You feel as though you are one, as though you are united. So he describes the sex ultimately as the glue of the relationship. And he says that this action is the complete harmony of the individuals. One of the most important life urges is sex, So by engaging in this activity, we are basically becoming prisoners of this urge. This is very similar to Schopenhauer because Jung also claims that a relationship has a biological basis of the maintenance of our species. Whether we know it consciously or not, we are seeking out to find partners that we can have good offspring with. The goal of the maintenance of our species is the ultimate goal of our collective unconscious that we all share. It's a link between partners and what makes us one. The partners of a marriage seek to grow together as a team and become a stronger unity, not as individual relationships. But when we talk about relationships, it's important to note our foundation and where it all began. So as a child, we have very small limits and only really know what our parents teach us. But as we age, our knowledge of the world expands and we begin to be influenced by TVs, by our friends, and other things that we're surrounded by. And we also influence those that surround us as well. Our will begins to display on surface level as we age, and they're pursued by our unconscious motivations. However, at first, our life is dedicated to pursuing our passions, but eventually becomes a duty when the number of responsibilities that we have when we get older increases. As time progresses, we must care for the children that we may have brought into this world. The transition from I want to I must becomes present because now you need to care for a family, you need to care for your children, you need to pay your bills, which isn't something that you really were concerned about when you were younger. Your parents cared for it, and now it's your turn to do the same. So at this point in our lives, Jung claims that we should have begun to settle, and our motives that were influenced by our unconscious should start to make sense to us. Realizations about ourselves begin to appear, and we kind of get more insight to our ultimate fate, what we're put on this planet for. He also claims that the second chapter, as we want to call it, of our lives differ from our previous years. However, adapting to marriage is hard, and some people adapt with greater ease compared to others. Jung states that a partner who has a positive relationship with their parents will find a small difficulty adjusting to their partner. However, someone who is hindered by an unconscious tie to their parents will take more time to adapt to their partner. We can come to the conclusion that when we first meet a partner and first get closer to a partner, there are unconscious motives that make us do so. But as time progresses, the fact that we have biological drives to maintain the species is highlighted. Marriage is ultimately a unity between two people in order to keep the species going. We come to the knowledge of love through failure and success, which is a lifelong process as we endure and more experiences with it. Consciousness is the foundation for how a relationship can exist because consciousness provides us with a distinction between me and you. With no distinction, there is no relationship. In the unconscious, there is no individual identity. You and I are practically the same. This identity is called the collective unconscious. Only our consciousness can provide a distinction between you and I, or me and my mom, or me and my friend. But the unconscious is unable to do so. Free choice in a marriage can be linked to the unconscious tie to a parent. A mom may be keeping herself unconscious to a dissatisfying marriage. Therefore, she unconsciously binds herself to her son in order to make up for the dissatisfaction in her marriage. Unconsciously, she's impacting her son's choice when he decides to go ahead and find a partner. As a result, Jung claims that individual happiness is bound to suffer because of these unconscious ties that we may have to our parents.
It is important to talk about infidelity in marriage because unfortunately it does happen. So Jung tries to explain that infidelity occurs when there's clashes between a partner who has a simple personality and a partner who has a more complex personality. When we look for partners to get involved outside of our relationship, it entails that we are unhappy. We are searching for fulfillment someplace else that isn't with the partner that we are with. The problem is that the complex personality still longs to be contained in self. Because a simple personality cannot meet that need, the marriage begins to shut out. This is his overall argument of why infidelity occurs. Essentially, the complex personality looks for someone to fulfill what he is missing with his partner who has a simple personality. I do not believe that infidelity is ever right, but this does offer an explanation as to why this happens. Jung claims that the reward for this situation is an undivided self. Jung argues that in our midday of life, we go through these drastic changes. The result of this transformation is uniqueness, your individual self. It is important to distinguish this because Jung is trying to argue that we don't need another person in order to discover ourselves. This entire transition takes a very long time from early age all the way to that midlife and then to the older life. We go through different experiences and meet new people, which transforms our thoughts on the world. This is why he highlights that as we get to the midlife, our fate becomes more evident, our will and our purpose for being on this earth. Things that didn't make sense to us in the earlier years now begins to make sense as we get into our professions and our wants and desires become responsibilities. Ultimately, we are born with unconsciousness, but as time progresses, we become more aware of our consciousness. Without consciousness, we are unable to form distinctions in relationships. Our marriages can be impacted based on experiences in midlife and realizations that we may come to. Problems in marriage also arise from our spiritual and psychological beliefs. I believe that many of Jung's theories make perfect sense, especially those talking about the unconscious ties to our parents. Now that we're nearing towards the end, we should sum up everything that we've learned today. 1. Carl Jung is a psychoanalytic psychologist who collaborated with Sigmund Freud, but unfortunately, after a couple of years, the collaboration ended because of a disagreement on Freud's basis of the sexual theory. 2. Carl Jung believed that our unconscious played a big role in our motives and who we decide to be with in the future. 3. Carl Jung also summarized that our unconscious ties to our parents play a role on traits that we look for in our partner. 4. Consciousness is a very big part of a relationship. Without consciousness, we are unable to have a relationship because there is no distinction between two individuals. 5. Carl Jung emphasizes that as we age and we get into seeing different parts of the world and gaining new experiences, our unconscious becomes more evident. Our fate and purpose of being on this planet arises. We now get a better understanding of why we made those unconscious decisions. 6. The transition to our middle life is characterized from desires and wants to responsibilities. We now have to go ahead and care for our significant other, pay bills, and take care of things that we did not have to when we were younger. 7. Infidelity in a marriage occurs because of a clash between complex and simple personalities. A partner in a marriage goes and cheats on his significant or her significant other because they feel as though they are unfulfilled in their marriage. Number 8. As we see in Carl Jung's essay, Marriage is a Psychological Relationship, we have a biological drive to maintain the species, similar to what Schopenhauer had previously stated. We should take everything that we learned today and attempt to reflect it into our own lives. We should think about whether we want to get married, our unconscious motives. We should also try to think about ties that we may have to our parents and how we think that impacts the character traits that we look for when we look for a partner. Overall, I agree with Carl Jung's perspective of marriage. I do believe that people that are unfulfilled in their marriage look for other ways to get that fulfillment. I also do think that we change over time, and when we get to our midlife, there's a higher sense of responsibility. Also, I think that when simple and complex personality people get together, there are oftentimes clashes because of the two distinct personality types. Although we may not recognize it sometimes, Our unconscious really does play a big part in our life, and that becomes more surfaced as we get to the middle age. I really think that the purpose of this assignment is to take a closer look at our life. And the purpose of the class is really to connect all of these different philosophers and try to get an understanding of where their thoughts stemmed from and how each unique philosopher plays a role into our life. Carl Jung really just pushes us to take a step back and reflect on our life when we get to the middle age. We should take this as a learning point and as a time of reflection to think about how far we've progressed in our life. Carl Jung's works were not just confined in the realms of psychology, it spread to art, and he began to influence the works of many others.
Thank you guys for watching.